Yeah, so just on the screen here, we've got a very simple way of talking about this. What about free will? People will ask at this point, which is an appropriate question to ask, I think. Do we have free will? And here's a simple way that we would try to answer that question. Yes, in a sense. Yes, we do have free will in a sense. Let's explain what we mean by that. We always choose what we are most inclined toward at the moment of decision. Now, I don't think that's even that hard to follow. I think that's pretty simple. Free will means you choose what you want, right? You're free to choose what you're most inclined toward, what you most desire in the moment of choice. So now we don't always follow our plans. We might say, hey, I'm gonna take a diet this month and I'm not gonna eat extra dessert. And then in the moment of 8:30 at night, you're looking at the ice cream in the freezer and you're going, you know what? I'm going to break what I said about, because, well, at that moment, you are still choosing your highest inclination. At the moment of choosing that dessert at 8:30, which you said you weren't going to do, at that moment, you are desiring the ice cream more than the diet, and so you always choose according to your highest inclination at the moment. Look at a couple of illustrations. If I was 14 years old and my dad said, hey, take the push mower and go mow our lawn, which was a decent-sized lawn for a push mower, I would say, oh, man, Dad, I don't think I want to do that right now. I'm not inclined to do that. I don't want to use my free will to do that right now. And my dad would say, okay, well, you can dishonor me, disobey, and be grounded, or you can mow the lawn. I said, Dad, nothing I would rather do than mow the lawn. I am so pleased right now. So what happens is, even if it's not something I would prefer on my own, I would rather mow the lawn than displease my dad and get in trouble, or maybe I'm really in a rebellious state of mind. I said, I don't care what the consequences are, Dad, I'm not mowing the lawn. Whatever we choose, we always choose according to our highest inclination at the moment of decision. And I don't think that's that controversial or hard to follow. So that's how I would define free will. We always choose according to our highest inclination. Does that make sense? Now, here's the next question. However, what are we most inclined toward when we are dead in sin? What are we always? What did Genesis 6:5 say? Every intention of the thoughts of the heart are only evil all the time. So yeah, you've got free will. You can choose whatever you want. And when you're dead in sin, what do you only want? Anything but Jesus, right? Anything but Jesus. It might be sports and relationships and the whole list of idols. We can choose those with all of our free might, with all of our free will. Our inclination loves the things of this world, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, all those different things 1 John speaks of. But can our hearts incline towards Jesus for Jesus' sake? Not to use Jesus to get out of hell, not to use Jesus to get a miraculous meal of free food like John 6 we saw on Thursday night. No. Can I incline toward Jesus because he is preferable in his own glory to the glory of the things of this earth? And our answer would be, that is something that you are morally incapable of doing until you are born again. That's what being dead in sin means. That's what it means. It means that I am so in love with the things of this world, I am so in love with God's creation over the Creator, that my heart is unable morally to incline to prefer God's glory over other things. And so this is a really important point to make here, and I want to hear from you guys on this. I'll just put a verse on the screen here, Romans 6 on the screen. But thanks be to God that you who once were slaves of sin have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, and having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. Now, you notice the phrase there? Who gets the credit for that transformation? God. But thanks be to God that you who once were slaves of sin, only preferring sin with your free will, right? Always preferring sin means you're a slave to sin. Suddenly you become obedient from the heart. Where does that come from? Dead hearts don't prefer God. They don't. That's what it means to be dead in sin. You don't prefer God. You love the darkness rather than the light because your deeds were evil. And so what turns the corner is the supernatural regenerating work of God in our heart, in our life. Thoughts on these things?
Well, I'll say this is Ephesians 2 to get a corollary text.
Let's turn there.
Ephesians chapter 2. Because when we talk about being dead, like in one sense, that means we are absolutely incapable of bringing ourselves to life. Dead people don't bring themselves back to life. Jesus was the only one who did that. That's why we need him. But as far as we're concerned, we're dead in our sins, meaning we are dead to God. We're dead to the glory of God, dead to the beauty of God, dead to all that is good. We're dead to that in the truest sense. But even though we're dead in that way, it's like we're the walking dead in another way. Mm-hmm. How do dead people act? Well, that's what Ephesians 2 says. And begin in verse 1 with me here. It says, you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked. And if we just, the way some people misunderstand what we're saying, well, that means you can't make any choices, it's like, it's not what we're saying.
You can choose whatever you want.
Yeah, you can, exactly. And what do we choose? Like you said, it says, being dead in trespasses and sins in which we once walked, following the course of this world. That means whichever way the world's going, that's the way we want to go. We follow it because we see it as valuable. Following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Pause. Everyone who's not a believer is directly or indirectly following Satan, because that's who the prince of the power of the air is. Now, most people say, I'm not a devil worshiper. No, you might not be outwardly worshiping the devil, but if you are not following Jesus, then that's the only other option you have. Text says that. Following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit now at work in the sons of disobedience. And then look at what he says. Among whom we all once lived. That's why I said it's like we're the walking dead. We once lived in the passions of our flesh. And this is what we did. We carried out the desires of the body and the mind. So whatever our bodies craved, whatever our minds imagined, that's what we pursued. That's what we go after in our sin. We go after it wholeheartedly, and the mind, and were by nature. This is just who we are, children of wrath, meaning that's what we deserve, is the wrath of God. Like we're not children of God by nature. We're children of wrath. We're creatures who have rebelled against God, and we daily, hourly, minute by minute prefer things other than God. And so that's why we're fitting to be called children of wrath. Like that's what such a life and a pursuit and a preference deserves, is God's wrath. And again, he's talking here, look at the very end. We were children of wrath like the rest of mankind. Before God saves you, before he saves me, there is no difference between us and every other unbeliever. It's not until God intervenes that something changes. Before that, we are just as worthy of God's judgment and wrath as anyone. And we're under that until Jesus takes us out.
Could you tell us about the lion? I love your lion story. But before you do that, would it be safe to say the unbeliever can choose the kind of sin they want? They're free to choose the kind of sin and maybe how much they do. But they're not free to choose Jesus.
Right. And so let me say a word about that, because this is where people are going to often get tripped up a little bit with what we're trying to say. So I've got on the screen here. To be a slave of sin means we always choose sin. This is not, now this is so important. This is not because we are forced to, but because we love to. We want to, okay? So hear me out on this. And a lot of theologians have talked about this distinction, and if you want to jot this down, I don't have it on the screen, but these two different kinds of inability we've got to distinguish in our mind. You could call it physical inability, would be one, and the other one would be moral inability. Physical inability and moral inability. The objection to what we're saying at this point, and I've heard it before, is people will say, how can God judge someone for doing something that they can't do? For not doing something they can't help but do. Did I say that right? You see what I'm saying? I was like, well, I can't do this. I can't choose God, and you're going to judge me for something I can't do. That doesn't seem just. That's the objection. So here's what I want to say. That would be right if it was physical inability. So here's what I mean. If a person is, if God said, okay, I want you guys to jump across the Atlantic Ocean, and if you don't do it, I'm going to strike you in judgment. And we want to honor God, and all our motives are right, and we go running to the edge of the sand, and we jump, and we make it a few feet, and we flop into the water. And if God says, how dare you, I'm going to judge you for doing what you can't do. God's not going to do that, because that would be something we are physically incapable of doing, and no matter how much we want to do the right thing, and we try to please God, we're physically unable, and God is not going to judge someone for being unable to do what they're physically unable to do. So the difference here is moral inability. Moral inability is different. We've quoted it before, but look on the screen again, John 3:19. This is moral inability. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. In other words, if someone prefers the light, that's a work carried out in God. That's something that God has done in intervention in our life. So if what's holding me back from Jesus is my love of sin, and my love of sin is so intense that I won't let it go because I absolutely resist the thought, then I'm still accountable for that. If someone, one other illustration would be if a mom is having a hard time with, her son and she's telling him to do something, and the son, clean your room, right? And the son is perfectly old enough to understand that. The son is perfectly capable physically of standing up and cleaning the room. But the child is just in a moment of pure rebellion, and the child is like, no, I'm not going to do it. And in that moment, that child is fully capable of cleaning the room physically, but there's a moment where they're giving in and they're morally, they become absolutely resisting the thought of doing what is right. We are not physically incapable of choosing Christ. We are morally so in love with sin that we won't ever choose Christ, which therefore makes us morally unable. Thoughts on that?
Like the lion. God, tell us about the lion.
I think he wants to hear about the lion.
I like this story. This thing made sense to me a couple decades ago when Mark started talking about it.
This is from James Boyce, the great preacher from Philadelphia, 10th Presbyterian Church. He died, I think, in the year 2000, friend of R.C. Sproul and others. James Boyce told this, and I've slightly tweaked it, but this is pretty much his. So a picture, you got two lions in cages. Have y'all heard this before? I don't know if I've told this recently. You got two lions, one in each cage. And both of these lions are on the verge of starvation. They have not eaten in a long time. They're desperately hungry. And imagine that you were to take like oats, right? I guess horses would eat that or something. You take oats and you pour them in there with the lions. My guess is that both lions would smell the oats, very interested. They might even lick them and taste them. But of their own free choice, what are both lions going to choose to do? They're not going to eat the oats. Why? Because lions are carnivores. They don't perceive oats as actual edible food. They don't see it that way. So the lions just sit there. And so here the lion has edible food laying in front of it. And the lions, both of their own free choice, choose not to eat it because they don't perceive that as food. It looks like bark or something. They're not going to eat this. And so imagine God supernaturally changes the nature of one of those lions and makes it an omnivore. Okay? Both lions are now still using free will. They're both choosing what they want. Lion A, who's still a carnivore, is choosing of its own free will to not eat life-saving oats because it doesn't perceive them as desirable or food. And it's going to starve to death right there of its own free choice, right? If God were to grant the opening of the eyes of the mind to the other lion, lion B, and give it the nature of an omnivore, guess what? As soon as that perception changes, that lion is going to devour the oats and save its life. At no moment in that story is either lion having its will violated. Both lions are getting exactly what the lion chooses every moment, right? They're both choosing to not eat. But the moment God opens the eyes of one, God's in control, right, of the choice. When God opens the eyes of that lion, what happens? It freely and necessarily chooses to embrace.